My second year of college was a difficult year. I wish I could say that it was due to organic chemistry or boyfriend drama or anything other than what actually happened. I started my year in a great dorm. I loved my hallmates, my room, and the fact that the dining hall was less than 100 feet away. Obviously, I spent a lot of time there, and I got to know the staff. I'd worked in a restaurant for 2 years before going to school, and I could identify with the struggles that come with being a food service worker. Especially because I was at a notoriously snobby school, so I sympathized with the staff having to deal with the rich kids and their entitled bullshit. Most of the staff were lovely people, but one in particular seemed to take a real interest in me. He was a young white man, not much older than myself, named Matt. He always went out of his way to talk to me and ask me questions about myself and how school was going. One evening, I was doing homework in the dining hall around closing hours. Matt sat with me and we chatted for a bit. He said he was off work and was heading to his car to smoke a bowl before he went home, and asked if I wanted to join. I'd only smoked a few times before, but I enjoyed it, and he seemed harmless enough, so I agreed. I was still very much a sheltered child, and to me, he didn't seem like a bad guy, so he couldn't be. We lit up in his car, and in the parking lot behind the dining hall, and I got a glimpse of the real Matt. He ranted about how his ex-girlfriend had recently dumped him. He called her a bitch and a whore and told me unnecessary details about their apparently kinky sex life. The virgin in me was incredibly uncomfortable, only made worse by the paranoia brought on by the weed. He also went on about how much he hated the students at my university, especially the girls, saying they treated him as less than human. I was completely speechless, and when I didn't respond, he tried to apologize for going off, saying that I was different and that he wanted to get to know me better. I remember blurting out that I needed to go, and I got the hell out of Dodge. He got out too and shouted after me to come back, and thought he might chase me, but he didn't, and I got back to my room safely. I avoided that dining hall like the plague for the next week, and I didn't see him again until the one night that still haunts me to this day. Around midnight, I was walking back to my dorm alone from a function at the Christian Center, which was only about 2 blocks away. I know walking by myself was stupid, but the buses weren't running, and I felt bad asking someone to walk with me because there was some steep inclines between the center and my dorm. I was walking along an empty residential street that was just around the corner from my dorm when I noticed a black SUV that was creeping along behind me. It was going so slow that it was hard not to notice. At first I tried not to panic, but it quickly clicked that it was the same car as Matt's. I started to run when it sped up ahead of me, and a man in a ski mask jumped out at me. I just knew it was Matt. From here, things happened very fast. I tried to run the other way, but he grabbed me from behind and was struggling to get my wrist into handcuffs while simultaneously pulling me toward his car. I was screaming at the top of my lungs and fighting like hell. We fought each other for a few minutes like that before he dropped the handcuffs and I was able to slam my heel into his foot. I think those two things and my relentless struggling shook his confidence because he ran back to his car and sped off. Freaked out, I ran back to my room, constantly looking back to see if he was after me. Thankfully, he didn't follow, and I was able to call the police. I was very lucky that night. Not only because I got away, but also because he was caught shortly after I called 911. He was arrested, and when the police searched his car, they found handcuffs, duct tape, and a knife. During interrogation, he confessed that he was bitter and depressed over his breakup and wanted to make someone feel pain like he feels it. Nearly a year later, after a painful testimony from me, He was convicted to 40 years in prison, with a 32-year suspension for abduction and intent to defile. So when I was barely 20 years old, I was traveling with a small group of people through China, and we were spending about 2 months in Kokonar province, which used to be part of Tibet. Our destination was a specific town to teach English, but we'd been stopping often in towns and small cities along the way. One day we arrived in a rural town. Very small. Nothing unusual. We spent only a couple of days there, shopping for foods at the markets and walking around to see the sights, although there weren't many. This was in the dead of winter, in February, and all the grass on the hills and plains around the town were dead and brown. The overall feeling was that of the normal kind of bleakness that any rural place has in the winter. At this time in my life, things were going amazingly, extraordinarily well for me. And I say that because my teenagehood had rather been darkly overcast. But the overwhelming good luck of being able to travel and these close friends I had made in the last year had more than changed feelings and attitude towards life. It was like I was a whole new person. I was ecstatic to be in Tibet. I went to sleep with a smile on my face every single night. On our second day staying in the small town, I woke up feeling a bit odd. Not bad, just odd. Like my normal thoughts and feelings had been turned down low, like on a dial. We all decided to go for a walk on the hills right behind the town, where there was a small summit with a pile of rocks and some prayer flags. Albeit they were altars like these on every hill, but it gave us something to do. As we hiked up the hill behind the town, I started feeling stranger and stranger. I wasn't scared, and I didn't feel angry or any strong emotion. In fact, it was like emotion was trickling out of me somehow, and I was getting blanker and blanker, emptier and emptier. My mind started feeling a little hazy, and more I felt like I was simply not caring about anything. A small and rapidly dwindling part of myself started to panic, knew that something bad was happening, but it was like my own inner voice was slowly getting quieter and quieter. I remember when we reached that little summit, and I simply sank to the ground next to the pile of rocks. Without meaning to, I started tuning out the voices around me and fixed all my attention on the little pebbles in the dirt. I began tapping one against the other, repeatedly. Do you know the kind of horror that is opposite of feeling scared or feeling anything at all? The kind of vacuous hideousness of a fly buzzing against a closed window for hours on end in an empty room. That's what was filling my mind. It was demonic in its meaninglessness. I touched my face, and I felt that I was grinning at nothing. Through all the emptiness, a thought floated to the forefront of my mind. You should just die. At first, it sounded totally reasonable, but something in me fought it, and I was momentarily troubled. Right then, my group started to walk down from the hill, and I followed. The further we walked, the more normal I felt, until we left the town that afternoon, and I was totally freaked out. When another girl, Hannah, mentioned in an odd, offhand way that she had felt very strange and depressed while staying there, I told her that I'd felt the same. When the group leader mentioned that a local had told him that the town had been plagued with a rash of young women under 25 committing suicide, Hannah and I went white. I worked as a teacher in Baton Rouge, LA for 2 years after I graduated from college. While there, 4 of my friends and I lived in an awesome and spooky old house. The house was on the site of an old plantation in the Goodwood part of the city, and a 250-year-old oak tree with a beautiful balcony stood in the backyard. The house was so cool that when we first moved in, we were too excited to be cognizant of any problems with the house. But over time, we began to feel more and more uneasy at night. Simple midnight trips to the bathroom on the first floor became terrifying experiences, and we all had the feeling of being watched. Then one night, in the middle of 2011, I had the most vivid dream that I have ever had. In it, an older woman with a bizarrely menacing face and gray hair came out of the wall and held me down in bed. She screamed at me, "Get out!" while pressing down on my chest. I woke and swear on my life that something was in the room with me. I somehow fell back asleep, but knew that I had to tell someone with the story in the morning. I ran into one of my buddies in the kitchen the next morning and told him about the ghost in my dream. When I finished telling the story, he stopped and looked at me sideways for a second, then told me to slowly repeat my story. His face absolutely lit up with horror after the second telling. He told me he had the same dream a few nights before in his own bed, which is especially creepy given that this room is right next to mine. We were both freaked out, but teaching and being 22 made us forget about our encounters for a time. Fast forward to 2012, when we switched rooms within the house. A third friend, who had never lived with us before, moved into my old room, and within a month came into the kitchen one morning to tell us about a creepy dream involving an old woman. My second friend and I looked at each other and knew that he was going to repeat the exact same dream that we had the year previous. Unsurprisingly, he did, and we were all absolutely petrified. The strangest part? We had never told the third friend about our own dreams, and his experience was removed from ours by at least a year. A month or so after that, I was in my new room, which was coincidentally right across the hallway from my old one. I was fast asleep with a lady friend, but awoke to an anonymous presence in the room around 3 in the morning. I rolled over to find that my companion was wide awake and was literally whimpering. I asked her what was wrong, and she told me that there was an old lady at the side of my bed glaring at her and telling her to go. She refused to stay at home after that, and I began to spend more time away from the residence as well. A final creepy turn took place on our move-out day, before all of us left Baton Rouge, and our second friend was the last to leave the house. As he locked the front door one last time, he swears that a woman's voice whispered, "Get out," as he closed the door. None of us ever shook the feeling that something else was in that house with us. All my friends from that time are successful school administrators, businessmen, or lawyers. And we swear that this story was entirely true.